April of 1909, a newspaper published a story so extraordinary that more than a century later, people are still asking whether it was history or one of the greatest mysteries ever printed. According to the report, an explorer traveling through the Grand Canyon discovered something impossible. Not a cave, not ancient ruins, but an enormous underground complex, hidden deep inside the canyon walls. Its chambers were said to contain carefully preserved mummies, strange inscriptions, copper weapons, massive stone halls, and artifacts unlike anything ever discovered in North America. The article claimed the discovery was connected to the Smithsonian Institution. If true, it would have rewritten the history of an entire continent. But then, the story simply vanished. No photographs, no excavation, no museum exhibits, no official records confirming the discovery. Only a newspaper, and a mystery that refuses to disappear. But here's what makes this story even stranger. Long before anyone printed that headline, long before tourists stood on the canyon rim, and long before archaeologists mapped its cliffs, the Hopi people had already preserved a story about an underground world beneath the Grand Canyon. A place of emergence, a place of refuge, a place remembered through generations, not as fantasy, but as sacred history. So, was the newspaper describing an elaborate hoax? Did it borrow from traditions that already existed? Or could two completely different stories, separated by centuries, be pointing toward the same mystery? To answer that, we have to begin, not in 1909, but thousands of years earlier. Because the Grand Canyon is far more than one of the world's greatest natural wonders. It is a landscape where geology, history, and belief have become impossible to separate. Before it became a national park, before its cliffs were measured, before millions of visitors arrived each year, the Grand Canyon already had a history. Not one written in books, but carried in memory. For the indigenous peoples who have lived across this region for countless generations, the canyon is far more than a geological wonder. It is sacred, a place where the land itself remembers. Among the many tribes connected to this landscape, the Hopi preserve one of North America's oldest continuous oral traditions. Much of that tradition remains private, shared only within the community. What has been shared publicly deserves to be understood with respect. Not as entertainment, not as evidence of lost civilizations, but as a living cultural history. In Hopi tradition, this is the fourth world. The worlds before it ended in catastrophe. Some through fire, others through ice. Each time, humanity was given another chance. According to these traditions, our ancestors did not simply appear in this world. They emerged into it. That emergence is connected to a sacred place known as the Sipapu. For some Hopi clans, Sipapuni, near the meeting of the Little Colorado and Colorado rivers, marks the place where their ancestors entered the present world. It is not simply a location. It is the beginning of a journey, a bridge between what came before and the world we know today. Another tradition speaks of mysterious helpers, often called the Ant People. Different Hopi communities preserve different versions of this story. But in later published accounts, these beings are remembered as protectors during times of great disaster. When earlier worlds faced destruction, they offered shelter beneath the earth, keeping people safe until it was time to emerge again. Whether understood as spiritual beings, symbolic teachers, or sacred memory, Their role is always the same. Survival. Not conquest. Not power. But endurance. For generations. These traditions live only in oral history, passed carefully from elder to child. Long before newspapers. Long before archaeology. Long before anyone claimed to discover hidden chambers beneath the Grand Canyon. And that is what makes the next chapter so extraordinary. Because in the spring of 1909, America woke up to a newspaper headline that seemed to echo stories already carried for centuries. What happened next would become one of the most controversial stories ever linked to the Grand Canyon. On the morning of April 5, 1909, readers of the Arizona Gazette opened their newspaper and found a story unlike anything they had ever seen. The headline described an astonishing archaeological discovery. According to the article, an explorer named G.E. Kincaid had been traveling through the Grand Canyon by boat when he noticed something unusual. High above the Colorado River, hidden within a nearly vertical cliff, was what appeared to be the entrance to a cave. Reaching it was difficult. But once inside, the report claimed, he discovered something extraordinary. Not a single chamber, but an enormous underground complex, stretching deep into the canyon walls. A central corridor reportedly extended hundreds of meters, with passageways branching in every direction. Some rooms were said to contain pottery, copper tools, weapons, and carefully preserved grain. Others held statues, stone carvings, and rows of mummies, seated upright instead of lying flat. Perhaps the strangest claim of all was that symbols carved into the walls resembled writing unlike anything known from ancient North America. The newspaper even suggested that some artifacts resembled those of ancient Egypt or Asia. Then came the most remarkable detail. The article claimed the discovery was being examined with support from the Smithsonian Institution. If true, this would have been one of the greatest archaeological discoveries in American history. 4 days later, the newspaper published a second article, adding even more details. For a brief moment, it seemed the world was about to witness history being rewritten. But then, everything went silent. No photographs were ever released. No artifacts appeared in museums. No scientific reports followed. And no excavation was ever publicly confirmed. As historians began investigating the story, they searched for evidence. The Smithsonian has repeatedly stated it has no record of the expedition described in the newspaper. No employment records for G. Kincaid. No official record of Professor S. Jordan, the archaeologist mentioned in the articles. No catalogued artifacts matching the descriptions. For most historians, that is enough to conclude the story was almost certainly a newspaper hoax. And yet, despite more than a century of skepticism, the mystery refuses to disappear. Because the Grand Canyon itself continues to inspire one unavoidable question. Could a place this vast still hold secrets no one has found? The evidence may reject the newspaper's claims, but the canyon has never stopped guarding its own mysteries. The Grand Canyon has been studied for more than a century. Geologists have traced nearly 2 billion years of Earth's history through its rock layers. Archaeologists have documented thousands of sites, from ancient campsites to granaries to rock art, carefully preserved within caves and sheltered cliffs. These discoveries tell a remarkable story, not of a forgotten Egyptian colony or a hidden underground empire, but of the indigenous peoples who have called this landscape home for thousands of years. The canyon holds real history, and that history is extraordinary enough on its own. Still, the mystery of 1909 refuses to disappear. Perhaps because the newspaper story was written with such vivid detail. Perhaps because the Grand Canyon feels like the kind of place where impossible things could remain hidden. Or perhaps because long before that article was ever printed, the Hopi had already preserved stories of emergence, of sacred places beneath the earth, and of survival through catastrophe. Those traditions were never meant to prove a newspaper report. They stand on their own, as part of a living culture, passed from one generation to the next with care and reverence. Confusing sacred tradition with sensational claims does a disservice to both. Yet placing them side by side reveals something fascinating. Not evidence of a lost civilization, but evidence of humanity's enduring desire to explain the unknown. Because the greatest mysteries are not always hidden inside caves. Sometimes, they live in the stories we choose to remember. Today, millions of people stand on the rim of the Grand Canyon, looking across a landscape carved by unimaginable time. Most will never descend into its depths. Fewer still will enter its hidden caves. And perhaps that is part of its power. Not every silence demands an answer. Not every shadow hides a secret. Some places inspire awe simply because they remind us how much remains beyond our understanding. So, was there ever a hidden city beneath the Grand Canyon? History offers no convincing evidence that there was. But the newspaper remains. The questions remain. And the canyon keeps its own counsel. Its cliffs still rise. Its river still carves the stone. Its sacred places still matter to those who have known them the longest. And somewhere between documented history, living tradition, and the stories we continue to tell, the Grand Canyon reminds us of something timeless. The greatest mysteries are not always those waiting to be discovered. Sometimes, they are the ones that refuse to be forgotten.